How often do we wish that we would have found out something about ourselves sooner? That if we had, it would have saved so much work, so much chaos, maybe even so many bad decisions? This was me when I found out about perfectionism. Now, when I discovered I was an INFJ, I also discovered that perfectionism seemed to be quite prevalent with the INFJs and the INFPs, but I didn't think that it was me. Okay, I was like, well, yeah, perfectionism. Nope, that's not me. Because I had the wrong idea of what perfectionism really was. This is what I'm going to talk about today because many INFJs struggle with perfectionism. And if you are like me, maybe you don't think that you do because you have the wrong idea of what perfectionism really is and how it actually does impact us. So if we haven't met before, welcome to my channel. I'm very glad that you found it. I hope you find it helpful. My name's Trina Bretnell. I'm an INFJ coach. If you're returning, I'm glad that you came back and I'm very grateful for you. So I had the wrong idea of what perfectionism was. I thought perfectionism was like when you hang a picture, you've got to like do all the measurements so it's completely square and perfect in the world. Or if you're making your bed, there's like no wrinkles, everything's perfect, your house is perfect. Have you seen my house? You would know that that is not true. Not that my house is a pigsty, but it tends to get to be a disaster, right? I'm an INFJ. We get like laser focused on something, and then sometimes we forget about everything else going around us. Now, I thought that that's what perfectionism was. Everything had to be perfect. My house definitely wasn't like that, nor do I waste my time trying to be like that because that doesn't bring me joy, so I don't do it. I wasn't a perfectionist, so I thought I was very much wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. When I discovered what perfectionism was, and actually, I'm going to throw this out there because it kept coming up, perfectionism, like the topic kept coming up, maybe YouTube videos I would see about perfectionism or books people would recommend on perfectionism, and I would ignore it. I'd be like, nope, swipe, that's not me. I don't struggle with that. I've got like my son's toys on the floor. Possibly my bed's not even made. Hard to say. I'm not a perfectionist by any means. So I would like scroll past it or whatever, ignore it. I ignored the synchronicity of that coming up. I shouldn't have done that. I ignored it for a lot of years because I actually do struggle with perfectionism, but I had the wrong idea about it. Now, my point is that I'm getting at here is oftentimes the thing that we need the most, we avoid. Okay. I was avoiding all the stuff on perfectionism. One, because I didn't think that I was a perfectionist, but two, because I needed it. And I didn't like it. It felt wrong. It felt icky, if you will, to me. So I would avoid perfectionism. So that's just a little tidbit when you're doing personal development. Oftentimes the topics that we're avoiding most, the books that we don't really want to read, like, ooh, no, I don't want to read that. That's definitely not for me, is probably something that you actually need the most. We tend to avoid that. That's a little bit off topic, but it was a little piece of advice that was given to me by a personal development guru, and it actually led to be true. So I follow that piece of advice, and when I see a book that really turns me off, that is my cue to pay more attention to it, or a topic that turns me off, because it's probably something that I need. Anyway, perfectionism was one of those. I avoided it like the plague because I really didn't think that I was a perfectionist. And I thought perfectionism was really, really a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. However, it can slow us down massively. I don't like to think of it as a bad thing because we struggle with it. And when we think of it as a seriously bad thing, then it's really hard to find solutions because we get into that negative mindset instead of the growth. So I don't like to think of it as a bad thing, but I do think of it as something that we need to be aware of. So that's what I thought perfectionism was. Everything had to be perfect around you, okay? Definitely not me. However, perfectionism isn't that. It can manifest in many, many ways. Many ways. For example, unrealistic standards. Now, I'm going to give you guys a few examples. These are the ones that came up for me. So I thought I would share them because I know, like talking with my clients and stuff, a lot of the same things come up that I struggled with, they struggled with too. So I just wrote down some of the ones that came up for me, the most common ones for me. So I hope this was helpful for you. Anyway, the first one is unrealistic standards. So setting too high of expectations. This was me. I have such high expectations and all or nothing. And what I mean by that is I would view outcomes as either perfect or a failure. So if the outcome, if I did something and if I didn't think it was perfect, then it was a complete failure. For example, years ago, I learned how to play guitar and I really enjoyed playing guitar. It came easy for me. So I joined, I was a some people wanted me to join this talent contest. I wasn't real thrilled about it, but I did it anyway. I joined this talent contest. Well, I won it. I won this talent contest. However, I know when I was up there picking my song away, I messed up in a couple spots. Nobody else paid attention to it. Nobody else picked it up. It flowed fine. It was nobody else knew I had messed up except me. I had messed up in two little spots of these songs. So to me, it was a failure. Even though I won the talent contest, I couldn't accept it as a win. It was a failure because I messed up on these songs. And people would be like, no, it sounded great. You won. And then I remember saying back to them, because I was only 14 at the time, I'd be like, yeah, but nobody else was really that good. Oh, that's so lame. It was nasty to say that. Of course they were good. Everybody was good. It was talent, right? But it was a whole bunch of guitar players that I was competing against. I won, and to me it was a failure because I messed up in a couple spots. So that's perfectionism. Okay. Another one is procrastination. Is perfectionism. I have this. It's the fear of failure. Not so bad now. I know it's there, so I deal with it, knowing that it's there. Being overwhelmed by details. This was huge for me. What I mean by this is spending excessive time planning or overthinking instead of taking action. So I would get this idea, like working on my own business that I had a few years ago, and I would get this idea and I would spend so much time planning and thinking about it, I would never take action. Eventually, because it led me down the overthinking path, I actually ended up talking myself out of doing it because of this. That's a form of perfectionism. Difficulty delegating was another one for me. Not trusting others to be good enough. They're not going to do a good enough job. I've got to do it. I was like this with my oldest son. Not him per se, but trusting people to look after him. No, I'm his mom. I know what's best. I can do this. So I never ever got a sitter for him, ever. Yeah, so that was definitely me. When I read that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. When I worked outside of the home, it was me. I had a hard time getting people to cover my job because they didn't know what I was doing. I would teach them, but I wouldn't keep up with the teaching, so that my scope of job, it would change a little bit and I would never update them, as I wasn't taking time off anyway because I did it the best. Perfectionism, total, not like that anymore. Because I know it's there, I can identify it when I'm doing it and I can step back. Micromanaging goes in with this too. I'm not so much of a micromanager, I never have been, but it does go hand in hand with that. Excessive self-criticism, again, that was me, and I didn't link it to perfectionism. I was horrible with that. So I would focus on my flaws and mistakes instead of my achievements. Again, going back to unrealistic standards, right? It kind of goes hand in hand. And I couldn't celebrate any of my successes. I couldn't even see them as successes, any of them. That's how critical I was of myself. So it was horrible. Another thing that goes with this is not being able to accept praise. When you do something and somebody praises you, you can't accept it. You won't accept it. That was me, but I also see it with a lot of other people, and that is a form of perfectionism. And it's very sad. But knowing it, being aware, is very helpful. Another thing that I did, and this was the last one, is social comparison. This is a bad one, and I didn't realize this was perfectionism. So I was constantly comparing myself to others, even if it wasn't an accurate comparison. So, for example, I'd be like comparing myself to somebody else that does the same thing as me as a business, not even realizing that they've been in business for 10 years longer than I have. So they're not even at the same place. Like I'm here and they're here because they've got all that year's experience, right? Envy and resentment is another one that goes along with the social comparison. Um, And then we also struggle, perfectionism will also make us struggle with making decisions. We have a really hard time with making decisions because we fear regret. That was a huge one for me. I thought I would just throw this one in. It just came into my head now. So that one's the last one of what perfectionism looks like. Now, there's a whole list. Maybe you can resonate with some of these, maybe none of them, but there's a whole list of what perfectionism looks like. Again, these were my top ones that I pulled out that I find that most INFJs, when I'm working with them, they can relate to a lot of that. And lots of times they didn't realize that that was actually perfectionism. I didn't. But like I said, knowing that it is was huge, huge for me. So what else can we do to help with this? Because it's not great places to be, especially when you're like comparing yourself to people or you're procrastinating and talking yourself out of taking the action of what it is you want to do. It's not fun, is it? So we can embrace our mistakes. That's a big one, and it's a hard one for us to learn. I know it was a really hard one for me to learn because mistakes were bad. That was failure for me. So have compassion with yourself, go slow at it. Make small mistakes intentionally. Okay? Build up the tolerance to being able to make mistakes. That's how I did it. I started making mistakes intentionally so that when I would make mistakes, it was okay. I had built up the tolerance. It seemed to work well for me, so I thought I would share that. Search for opportunities for learning out of the mistake. Instead of coming down on yourself, now we know that we're going to come down on ourselves because we made a mistake. We're going to link it to failure, blah, blah, blah. Oh, this is my perfectionism going on. Now we can pause, step back, and start looking for opportunities for growth, for learning. Okay, I made a mistake. It's not a failure. Now I know it doesn't work that way, so we're not going to go that way. But let's look at what did work about this. Challenge perfectionism, the thoughts. Challenge those thoughts. So, like cognitive restructuring is what I mean by that. The word had actually slipped my mind was what I was going with that one, but that's what it is. Cognitive restructuring. So what I mean by that is think about what's the worst that could happen. So if I don't succeed, what's the worst that can happen? Am I going to die? Probably not. Probably not. If it's not a life-threatening thing, then probably not. That's probably the worst thing that could happen is I'm going to die. And I'm probably not going to die. So let's go with that. That helped me a lot. Thinking, well, what's the worst that can happen? When I actually got thinking about this, at first I had to think of, well, am I going to really die doing this? Well, no. But then when I got more thinking about it, I would actually think of legitimate, well, what is the worst that could happen? Well, the worst that could happen is I'll get no clients. Big deal, right? That was one of them. And limit the scope of tasks. This was a huge one for me because I would try and take on way more and everything would crash down and I would come down on myself and everything was a failure and it was just a mess. I was just in a messy spot. So limit your scope of tasks. Deliberately limit them to avoid overcommitting. Again, that's what I did. So tools such as, what is it called? The Eisenhower matrix. That's the word I'm looking for. That will help with it. Okay. This will help you prioritize tasks based on urgency and importance so that it doesn't all come at one time and then we don't get into overwhelm. Overwhelm's a bad place for me. So I hope that was helpful. Again, perfectionism manifests in many ways. I wish that I had known about this years ago because it would have saved me a lot of self-negativity, self-criticism, a lot of self-hate. If I would have really known what perfectionism was, and it wasn't just hanging pictures straight on my wall or making sure my bed was completely perfectly made. I hope it was helpful. If it was helpful, I invite you to like my video. And if you haven't, I also invite you to subscribe to my channel and feel free to share this. The more times it's shared, the more that we can help. Anyway, thanks for joining me and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.